Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to draw a blue cat eye in pastels. Now the first thing that I like to do, regardless of the eye colour, is map in the shape and size of the eye, and for this I'm using a combination of a black Carbonfellow and a blue Pitt pastel pencil. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I don't necessarily want to outline the entire eye in black if some of the portions are a little bit lighter. Now in some cases, if black is used all the way around the edges, then it can make it look a little bit more like a cartoon where everything has been outlined. Now once I've outlined the eye and I'm happy with the shape and size, if there is a bright highlight there, I will always use a white pencil to map in that reflection first. I therefore know I've got that as light as I can possibly get it, and then I can darken it and tone it down later. Now I had a very specific goal for this project. I wanted to be able to create this drawing using the Pitt pastel pencils to show that you don't need every single brand of pencil, hundreds of pencils to choose from in order to create highly detailed photorealistic art. Now when I used the Pitt pastel pencils, there was one pencil in particular I substituted with a Carbonfellow pencil. Now this is the black, and the reason for that is all explained in the real-time lesson. It makes a very big difference to the layering process, and this is something that I have found can be very detrimental to how the layers therefore can be added on top of a base layer. And of course this is something that I focus thoroughly in the real-time step-by-step lesson, and if this is of interest I'll link all of the information to that in the description below. Now as you can see here, as I continue to layer the iris colour, I want to try to keep that blue nice and pure, as bright as I can. I don't want those layers to get muddy. Now when working with pastels, if we use the wrong layering process and a dark colour mixes in with a lighter colour, especially where you're trying to capture bright colour saturation like this, then those colours can end up looking very dull. In some cases that can be hard to correct, so it's usually best to try to make sure that we're using the right layering process to avoid it happening at all. Now in some cases it might feel like having less pencils to choose from would make the drawing process harder, but in some cases it can actually make it a lot easier. By having more pencils in front of us, we can complicate that layering and colour selection process. So if we have less pencils to choose from, we can really simplify that and layer those pencils to create more of those unique colours. Now if colour selection is something that you do find quite overwhelming, then reducing the number of pencils that you use can really help. Now as I continue to layer here, I'm really focusing on the contrast more than the exact colour. This is something that I talk about in all of my lessons. I really want to be making sure that I've got my highlights and shadows correct, but I'm also paying attention to the midtones. The midtones help to build up more of that depth. Now as I start to work on the detail in here with this darker line on the outer side of the eye, I can only add this in once I'd got all of the iris completed. Because this kind of detailing is almost sat on the top layers of the eye, I had to make sure that whatever was underneath was drawn in first. Now the reason I like to focus on contrast and values so much is because I feel that's what creates that three-dimensional look of a portrait. It's not the exact colour that does that, because if that was the case then graphite wouldn't look realistic, and that really couldn't be further from the truth. Graphite can create some of the best hyper-realistic work, and that's because the values are right. Now you've seen here that the Pitt pastel pencils have been able to achieve a very realistic drawing. It's got lovely colour saturation. But I did go over the top with an additional black pencil and a white pencil to hype up my contrast. Now this is something again that I talk about in the real-time lesson to show that with these two extra pencils I'm able to take the artwork to the next level. I'm able to achieve that much additional shape and form because I've adjusted my contrast. Now as I start to work on the fur around the eye, this is where I want to be focusing on what layer to draw first. Now my main priority is to focus on a good base foundation. A good base foundation is going to help make those details look softer, it's going to increase the depth, and it's going to mean that I can really focus on building up that softness in each of the detailed layers. Now when working on a fur texture like this, that's really important. I want to try to make sure that I have replicated the texture as accurately as I can. Now again, this base layer, I'm not worried about the exact colour, it's more about the values. So I'm coming in with a mixture of my darker pencils, some blues and greys, even some purples and pinks at times. I want to be making sure that I've got the combination of whether or not it is a dark or a light colour for that base foundation correct. Now there you saw a colour wheel, and I was just explaining to my members how to select whether or not you need to have a warm colour or a cool colour depending on the colour that we can see in our reference photo. Now there I'm using a little bit of scrap paper to create a swatch and show that you can layer those colours together and mix those colours to help create that combination that we need. There is never one pencil that is the perfect colour, so being able to confidently mix the colours and know which colour to select from the ones in front of us can make this process so much easier. Now something else that really does help is I'm working on one smaller section at a time, so I'm not doing one whole individual layer across the entire study. Although I am doing the base layer all at the same time, I've worked on the lower left corner, I then started at the top, then I've come across to the right hand side and then finishing off in the top right corner. So by making sure that I've broken it up into 4 sections, I've not rushed any layer, I've not rushed through that pencil selection process. Now the other thing that you can see here is I am still following the fur direction. I don't just focus on that when I work with my details. I really do believe that if we focus on the fur direction at this early stage, we are more likely to follow that reference photo more accurately as we continue to layer. So even here, although it is a base foundation, I'm hinting at the 3-dimensional shape that's indicated by the way the fur curves and moves. But I wouldn't want to leave it like that, so I'm now coming in with a cotton bud and just blending out that layer, but making sure not to overblend. Overblending with pastels can happen very easily because they're a wonderful medium for creating that softness, but we really need to get the balance right with how soft each layer should be. Now as I start to put in the initial layer of detail, this is where I'm focusing on the fur that's closest to the skin and building up from there. I don't want to jump into my brightest highlights early on because I'm going to significantly limit what depth is created. Now as I start to work with more of those details, the one thing that I'm really focusing on here is pencil technique. Now because the tutorials that I've created for the real-time lessons are all with a voiceover while I'm drawing, everything is explained in the moment, there are no sections sped up or cut out, I'm really able to explain exactly what I'm doing at each stage. Now when I work with the pencil technique and mapping in the details here, I'm focusing on 3 main things. Now that is fur length, fur thickness and fur direction. Now I have a video here on YouTube, it's my top tips for drawing realistic fur in pastels. I'll link that in the description below if it's of interest. But in that video I speak about these 3 things and how they have such an impact with how realistic the fur looks. The direction of the fur is not random, it follows the underlying bone and muscular structure. So if we start to move our pencil in a way that is different to the reference photo, we will alter the shape of the face. Now that obviously will mean it's not going to resemble that pet or that animal as much as it should. Now the length of the pencil strokes is determined by how long that pencil is in contact with the paper for. So in some sections you might only need to do a dot. For example, the fur on the top of the cat's nose, where the bridge of the nose is, that fur is exceptionally short. So you may only need to do a dot or a line that's barely even 1 millimeter long. It really does need to be studied for the reference photo, and that is telling us how long each section of fur should be. Now the longer fur texture is going to have more freedom of movement to move, so we do want to be making sure that any slight alteration in the way that it curves, because that fur is longer, we do want to be making sure that we've captured that. Now the thickness of our pencil strokes is determined by a couple of factors, one of which is how much pressure is applied to the pencil, the other is how sharp or how blunt that lead is. Now depending on the layer that I'm drawing and the texture of that I need to be creating, those 2 things are going to be adjusted. But most of the time I don't ever use excessive pressure on my pencils when doing the details. That therefore is usually most of the time light pressure to achieve those finer lines. And the one thing here that I want to emphasize is just how many layers I've added. This level of realism cannot be achieved with 2 or 3 layers, it really is a gradual build-in process. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If it was, I'd be very grateful if you could give it a like and a thumbs up because it makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you are interested in drawing along to this real-time lesson or any of my other step-by-step tutorials, then I'll link all of that in the description below. If you do have any art-related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments because I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video next week, but as always, thank you so much for watching.